I've always hated night drives. There's something oppressive about the dark pressing in on all sides, the way the road stretches endlessly ahead, like a tunnel into nowhere. But sometimes, you don't have a choice. This happened 2 years ago, on a deserted stretch of Route 14. I was driving back from my parents' house after an awkward holiday dinner. I'd left late, trying to avoid conversation. Big mistake. The area's remote, a patchwork of farmland and dense woods that eat the moonlight. The road twists unpredictably, barely wide enough for 2 cars. Trees crowd the edges like silent spectators. It's the kind of place you'd expect to see deer leap out, their eyes glowing in the beams of your headlights. Or something worse. That night, the air was unusually heavy, clinging to the car like a damp blanket. The only sound was the soft hum of my tires on the asphalt, and occasionally, the creak of my old Honda's suspension as I hit a bump. I had the radio off. Somehow, the static always seemed louder out there, like the silence wanted to remind you it was in charge. I rounded a bend, the headlights cutting into the darkness. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer, something pale at the edge of the road. I eased up on the gas, leaning forward instinctively, trying to see past the glare of my high beams. But as I got closer, the shape resolved into something far stranger. It was a person, a man, standing perfectly still on the shoulder of the road. He was dressed oddly, like he'd stepped out of a different century. High-collared coat, boots, even what looked like gloves. His face was gaunt, almost skeletal, and he was staring right at me. Not at the car, at me. Through the windshield, as if he could see past the glare and the glass and the speed. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly, the tires screaming against the pavement. My heart was a hammer in my chest. The headlights framed the man as I came to a halt, maybe 20 feet away. For a second, neither of us moved. He just stood there, unnervingly still, his head cocked slightly to one side like he was curious. I rolled down the window a crack, the cool night air rushing in. "Hey," I called, my voice shaky. "Are you okay?" No response. He didn't even blink. Something about the way he stood, unnatural, like a mannequin that had been left out in the elements too long. I debated just driving off, but what if he was hurt? What if he needed help? Against my better judgment, I put the car in park and reached for the door handle. That's when he moved. It wasn't much, just a slight shift, as if he'd taken a step forward, but it was enough. Enough to send ice racing through my veins. His movements were wrong, too smooth, too deliberate, like each one was carefully planned and measured. I froze, one hand still on the handle, the other gripping the steering wheel. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He took another step, then stopped again, tilting his head the other way. "Do you need help?" I asked. Again. Louder this time. The man raised his arm, slowly, pointing past me, down the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror instinctively, but there was nothing. Just an empty stretch of blacktop, fading into darkness. When I looked back, he was closer. I hadn't seen him move, but there he was, just 10 feet from the car now. Panic kicked in. I shoved the gear stick into reverse and hit the gas. The car jolted backward, tires squealing, but I didn't care. I had to get away from him. My heart was a jackhammer, my breaths coming in short, ragged bursts. He didn't chase me, didn't run. He just stood there, watching as I reversed down the road, his face calm, almost amused. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed the car into drive and sped off, my hands trembling on the wheel. For a while, I didn't look back. I couldn't. But the farther I got from him, the more the doubt crept in. Had I overreacted? Maybe he really did need help. Maybe. The thought died as my headlights caught something ahead. It was him. The same man, standing in the middle of the road this time. I slammed on the brakes again, the car lurching to a halt. My stomach churned. How? How had he gotten there? There were no side roads, no way he could have outrun me. But there he was, exactly as before, staring at me with that unnerving stillness. He raised his arm again, pointing to something off the side of the road this time, a narrow trail leading into the woods. His gaze never wavered. I don't know why I didn't just drive past him, or plow through him. Maybe it was the way he pointed, as if he was trying to tell me something. Or maybe it was the way the woods seemed to call to me, the shadows deep and inviting. Against every shred of logic, I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. The night was eerily silent, the air colder than before. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud as I approached the man, keeping a safe distance. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, just pointed again, toward the trail. I should have left. I should have gotten back in the car and driven until dawn. But something pulled at me, a morbid curiosity I couldn't shake. I took a tentative step toward the woods. The man smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who knows something you don't. A secret that would ruin you if you learned it. I took another step, and then I heard it. A whisper, faint but insistent, coming from the trees. My name, over and over. "Daniel!" I turned back to the man, but he was gone. Just gone, as if he'd never been there. The whispers grew louder, closer. My legs moved on their own, carrying me toward the woods, into the darkness. The trees closed in around me, and the air grew colder with each step. The whispers were deafening now. Not just my name, but something else. Something I couldn't understand. And then I saw it. I can't describe what it was. Not fully. A shape. A presence. Something ancient and wrong. It loomed in the shadows, eyes glowing like embers. Watching. Waiting. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the car, or how I managed to drive away without crashing. I just remember the feeling of those eyes, burning into me, even as I sped down the road. I never took Route 14 again, and I never drive at night anymore. Sometimes, though, I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, and I swear I can hear it. A whisper. My name. Coming from the trees. I never believed in ghosts, or any of that supernatural stuff. I was the kind of person who always looked for a logical explanation, no matter how strange the situation. But the events that happened to me in the months after I moved into that old apartment have completely changed my perspective. If you asked me now, I'd say I'm still struggling to make sense of it all. I moved into the apartment when I was 24. It wasn't anything special. A 2-bedroom unit on the second floor of a rundown building in a quiet part of town. The rent was cheap, which is exactly what I needed. The apartment was a little shabby, but nothing too bad. The kind of place that looked lived in, but not uncomfortably so. It felt safe, in a way. The first few weeks were uneventful. I unpacked my things, settled into a routine, and spent my evenings on the couch with takeout and TV. The neighbors weren't anything out of the ordinary, just the usual sounds of people coming and going, muffled conversations through the walls. But there was something about the place, a feeling I couldn't shake, a quiet unease that lingered in the background. I thought it was just me being overly cautious in a new place. One night, about 3 weeks after I moved in, I was cleaning the apartment. It was late, nearly midnight, and I was wiping down the kitchen counter when I noticed it, a mirror on the wall. It was a simple thing, framed in black, hanging above the sink. I had never really paid attention to it before, but now it stood out to me. I don't know why, but I felt this strange pull toward it. I stared at my reflection for a few moments, wiping down the counter as I did. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. I hadn't realized it before, but the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. There was no traffic noise, no voices outside. It was like the whole world had gone still. That's when I noticed something in the mirror. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow in the corner of the room, or maybe the reflection of a passing car outside. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't anything like that. There was a figure, just a blur, but unmistakably a figure, standing behind me. A person. I whipped around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. The kitchen was empty. I checked the hallway and the living room, but nothing. I stood frozen, staring at the empty kitchen. My breath was shallow, and my mind raced to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe it was just the way the light hit the mirror. Or maybe it was my tired mind playing tricks on me. I had been working long hours and hadn't been sleeping well. I tried to brush it off and finish cleaning, but something about that mirror stuck with me. Every time I passed it, I couldn't help but glance at my reflection, half expecting to see something behind me. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. It had to be. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next few days were normal. Well, mostly. I still felt uneasy, but I went about my routine, trying to ignore that nagging feeling. I tried to focus on work and put the mirror out of my mind. But one night, a few days later, I had trouble sleeping. I kept tossing and turning, my mind racing. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Finally, I gave up on sleep and decided to get up for a glass of water. As I passed through the kitchen, I glanced at the mirror again. This time I saw something more clearly, a faint, shadowy shape. It wasn't just a blur. It looked like a person, the reflection of someone standing just behind me, inches away, almost touching me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. But again, there was no one there. The kitchen was empty. My pulse raced, and I felt dizzy with panic. I couldn't stop staring at the mirror, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next few days were a blur. I started feeling paranoid, like I was being watched. I couldn't focus at work, and when I was home, I couldn't shake the sense of something being wrong. The reflection in the mirror seemed to change every time I looked at it. At first, it was just a shadow in the background, but then I started seeing a face, a pale, distorted face, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted into a twisted grin. It was always there, staring at me when I looked into the mirror, like it was waiting for me to notice. I tried to avoid the kitchen, but I couldn't. Every time I passed that damn mirror, it felt like the reflection was pulling me in, like it was calling to me. One night, after a particularly sleepless evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the mirror off the wall, my hands shaking, and carried it into the living room. I was going to get rid of it, burn it, smash it, anything to stop whatever this thing was. But before I could do anything, I felt the strangest sensation, a pressure in my chest, like something was suffocating me. I dropped the mirror. The sound of it shattering against the floor echoed in the apartment. The pressure in my chest lifted, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But when I looked down at the shattered glass, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. The reflection in the shards wasn't mine. It was a figure standing behind me, smiling that same twisted grin. I didn't have time to scream. The last thing I remember is the sound of the door slamming shut and everything going dark. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later with no memory of how I got there. The doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong with me. But I was different. The unease, the paranoia, it never left. When I returned to the apartment, everything was as it had been before. But when I looked at the wall, I noticed something strange. The mirror was still hanging there, completely intact, and I could swear I saw something watching me from the other side of the glass.